right, so again, I think I just kind of, so my grandpa stopped teaching me 2020. We got in the argument where I was telling him that I thought that his teachings kind of encouraged my mom and dad not to talk to me because of his whole like make Ryan just wants independence, and I didn't feel like it was hopeful, but I wanted him to get to teach me again. So I wrote that based on true story book. And again, I was confused because I was like, okay, so maybe my grandpa's a little more left winging, because I remember I talked to him before this, and he was telling me that, because at first I was anti-prison because I saw prison as white supremacists, and I wanted to let all the black people go because I thought it was white supremacists and maintain the status quo. And that's why I was against religion, because I thought religion was like prison. It confines people. And I saw black people as more hypersexual and more violent, and I didn't want them to be in prison and punished. I wanted them, I wanted to encourage violence and hypersexuality, because I was like, the good is bad and the bad is good. And being repressed is not the flow. And I misused my grandpa's teachings once again. But my grandpa did teach, though, that, prison is not to punish people, because that's dualistic software, that's predator-prey software, but it is to rehabilitate people, or it's not to punish, but it's to protect people from themselves and for others from, it's to protect people from their own primitive levels of software and others from their primitive levels of software. So it's actually a form of protecting them. And you don't want to use prison to punish people, because that's dualistic, but it's to protect people from themselves. But again, it's not themselves, to protect people from their lower levels of software, and protect themselves and others from their lower levels of software. But the ultimate objective is to through education or whatever you can in the prison, it's not to punish the person, but it's to help that person to ultimately to upgrade his software to higher levels of software. My grandpa would say ultimately to the flow, to cooperation, to mutual participation in larger projects and national projects, mutual participation in global projects, which would be globalism. But globalism doesn't mean everybody race mixes. People can be separate, but they could be working together, mutual participation in larger projects. And then there's finally the flow. So, but I wanted to, but when in 2020, I went back to being, so when I became a white supremacist for a little bit, I was like, I wanted prison again and to punish people, But then when my grandpa was telling me, when I asked him, like, what do you think about that? My grandpa was like, well, you don't use prison to punish people. That's dualistic software. You want prisons to protect people from themselves, and it's also to help, to rehabilitate, to get people closer to the flow. So, but then in my 2020 book, when I went back to being a leftist, anti-white, I was like, yeah, there's this African tribe, and instead of prison, they put the people in the center of the tribe, and they tell them how much they love them, and that's, really, criminality is just the consequence of being alienated and isolated, and it's, the identified patients, and they act out, and really, so again, I wanted to make the victim the good guy, the good, the bad, and the bad good, right? And there could be some truth to that. There could be some truth to it, but at the same time, I had an agenda. I wasn't in the flow. And, like I described, okay, just like recently I listened to one of Myron Gaines' lectures or talks where Myron Gaines was talking to this woman, is this white woman. And the white woman's like, because Myron Gaines says something about like all women are stupid or something, right? And she was like, that's a generalization. It wasn't all women are stupid. He said all women are weak, are weaker than men. And she's like, that's a generalization. He's like, it's not a generalization. Women are physically weaker than men. She's like, no, that's a generalization. And then Byron was like, yeah, and generalizations are true sometimes. And she said, how can you say that as a black man? And as a white woman. And Myron was like, dude. So basically this white woman was a leftist, and she's thinking like, don't make generalizations about women, because, white people use generalizations against black people to maintain white supremacy. And so we should, let's get rid of generalizations and see people as individuals. And yeah, there's some women who are really strong, and there's some men who are really weak, and there's some black guys who are really smart, and there's some white guys who are really stupid. And come on. But she, she's thinking leftist, right? Now, there's some validity to that. My grandpa, so like I said, my grandpa, when I asked him, like, what do you think about why, women tend to go more toward, like caring professions and men more toward like math professions and or like STEM professions. My grandpa said, well, a lot of it could be cultural, you know, and because their parents like guide them in that way and stuff, and there could be some validity to that. But my grandpa was kind of hesitant to blame genes and stuff, because my grandpa would say it doesn't matter. Yes, there is different people, are not all the same. People have differences, but who cares? All that matters is just go all out, upgrade your software to, now I understand, away from like Darwinism and Freudianism and stuff, and see things as energy, all is one. And there's different ways of the flow, like the Mary and Martha way. You know, if you have a personality type that's more conducive to giving, then you might, you know, go into a caring profession, but still that could be the flow because it takes you outside yourself. Whereas people with other different personality types that are more like thing oriented, doing oriented, they might get into like STEM profession or engineering or something, right? But regardless, you just go all out, don't make excuses, no dualistic software. You're not trying to be, okay, so this is what my grandpa taught, like, you're not trying to be superior, inferior, or equal, because and when you try to be superior, inferior, or equal, you're still believing that there's a self and others that you're trying to be superior to or inferior to or equal to. So like communism is still, let's all be equal. But my grandpa said, okay, Jesus in the story of where there was this woman who was, she sinned, she was like a prostitute, and some 3 guys walked up to him or something. They're like, hey, you know, this woman's a prostitute, you know, should we stone her? And then Jesus said, he who is without sin shall cast the first stone. And I remember when I was like a white supremacist, kind of, when I became a white supremacist for a little bit, I wanted to think like, well, he didn't say don't stone her. Like, ultimately, yeah, you should still stone her. But what Jesus, and I remember that's what this one Messianic Jew was saying that, but that I was listening to. But the funny thing is, though, so what my grandpa taught, though, is that what was being taught is, he said, do not sin, you know, after he says this, but so he's not like condoning sin, but he said, he who is without sin shall cast the first stone. And what he was trying to do is he was trying to break them free of their superior, inferior, dualistic software, trying to be superior, because my grandpa says that's a problem to begin with, the illusion that you are a separate self and not being in the flow, not pure awareness. So, you know, they're trying to, so then he turns it around on themselves, and so they have to argue, hey, I'm less sinful than you. No, I'm less sinful than you. And they don't realize that they're all, you know, they're all not in the flow, and they're all like trying to trap Jesus. They're not in the flow. And so you don't want to be like trying to be superior or inferior to other people, and then they all just drop their stones, right? But you just want to excel. You just want to go all out. You want to, you know, inquiry, expand yourself, right? So now I understand that, but at that time I didn't really understand it. So like I said, 2020 I became a leftist again. And I, you know, like I said, I was into the idea of like, don't make generalizations. So I remember like one of my friends, he said something, I was driving with them, and he said something like, all women are, I don't remember what he said, but like all women are evil, right? That's not what he said, but he said like all women are evil. And then I asked my grandpa, what do you think about what he said? And my grandpa was like, that's a generalization. And he was like, and that's also judgmental because it's coming from the ego. It's emotional, what he said. And it's kind of self-confirmatory. Now, this is one thing that my grandpa would teach you. Would be like, instead of saying like, you know, dogs are strong. You know, the pit bull is strong. Say something like, it appears that the pit bull is strong, because that's less ego. It's less judgmental. There's less ego involved, and it's also, and it's less like arrogant when you say like, it appears to be, or it seems to be this. It appears that, because again, you if you're saying like, oh, I know this is a case of then that's the ego, and you're not open to the idea that, you know, you don't know. You know, even like Goodman said, like, you see a barn, and he said, you say that's a barn. I know that's a barn, but you don't really know it's a barn. We could be in the Matrix. This could be illusion. You know, you don't really know. So you say that it appears to be a barn. It seems to be a barn. But basically, what was I getting at? Oh yeah, so my grandma was like, you know, my friend said like all women are evil or something. My grandma was like, it could be judgmental coming from the ego, and it's also a generalization. So I was like, okay. So again, I just misused my grandpa's teaching. So it's true. And sometimes generalizations are true. Like Myron says, if you're in the flow, you could probably discern that, right? But I had an agenda. So I misused my grandpa's teaching. So I'd be like, yeah, no, don't make generalizations. You know, there's women who are smart and there's women who are stupid, and there's men who are smart and there's men who are stupid. Not all women are good at are bad at math, and there's women who are good at math, and there's men who are bad at math. And don't make generalizations. Come on, don't make generalizations. But really, my ultimate ulterior motive was to mix the white people and the black people because I saw myself as Jewish. So I'd be like, yeah, and in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, and same thing with blacks and whites. You know, there's some white people who are really good at basketball, could be really good at basketball, and there's some black people who are really smart, and you know, there's you know, this it's mainly in the environment. And so I had an agenda though. I wasn't really in the flow. I had an agenda to mix the white people because I saw myself as Jewish. But you know, I wasn't aware that that was dualistic software. But I was thinking, I'm in the flow because my grandpa teaches me to not make generalizations, and my grandpa teaches, you know, that white supremacy is not the flow. But but doesn't mean that race mixing is the flow either. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't really understand what the flow was at this time. This was like 2020. So I'm still thinking, you know, race mixing is the flow, because of white supremacy is not the flow. So I'll get to some more. In the later lectures, I'll get to how I started to break free of the dualistic software. How it really was after the death of my daughter that I started to break free of the anti-white thing that was kind of shaping me my whole life. I was always a Marxist, communist, and anti-white and anti-religion because I always saw religion as white supremacist, and I started to really recognize that after my daughter died, and also after the Palestine attack, Hamas attacked Israel too. So I'll get to that. But what else? Yeah, so I'll get to that in later lectures.